The marble hallways of the Donovans' mansion gleamed as though they had never seen a speck of dust yet for Grace, the young maid who scrubbed them daily. Those polished stones felt like cold reminders of her place in the world. She had worked for the Donovan family for 5 years, caring for little Emily since she was barely old enough to walk. Grace's laughter often filled the nursery. Her gentle hands had combed Emily's golden hair before school, wiped her tears at bedtime, and held her close through nightmares. To Emily, Grace was more than a maid. She was the motherly figure she rarely found in her own home. Richard Donovan, Emily's father, was a billionaire real estate mogul, known for his ruthless business instincts and flawless public image. But at home, his presence was more distant, more shadow than substance. Emily's mother had passed away when Emily was just 3 years old, and since then, Richard's parenting had been confined mostly to gifts and occasional appearances at school plays, always arriving in suits, never staying long. The scandal erupted on a cold November morning. Richard stormed into the kitchen, his jaw clenched, his face a storm of rage. Behind him trailed his lawyer, Mr. Harlan, with a look of uneasy determination. Grace was preparing Emily's breakfast when Richard's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Grace," he thundered, "you will explain to me right now what you've been doing to my daughter." Grace turned, startled, spatula still in hand. "Sir, I don't understand." Richard slammed a small notebook onto the counter. The pages were covered in shaky, childish handwriting. This filth. "Emily wrote that you've hurt her, that you've been unkind. Do you deny it?" Grace's heart stopped. She recognized Emily's handwriting, but the words twisted her stomach. Grace gets mad. Grace hurts me. Grace says I'm bad. The accusations written by a child's hand pierced her soul. She looked desperately toward Emily, who stood silent at the doorway, clutching her teddy bear eyes, wide with fear. "Sir," Grace said softly, her voice trembling, "I have never hurt Emily. Never. She is like my own child." But Richard's mind was set. Fueled by grief, pride, and the need to protect his only daughter, he fired Grace on the spot. By that evening, police were at her door. Within days, newspapers carried the shocking headlines. "Billionaire accuses maid of abusing daughter." Grace's name became mud, her reputation shredded in the public eye. Yet in the shadows of the mansion, Emily wept herself to sleep, clutching the teddy bear Grace had given her years ago. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as reporters scribbled feverishly into their notepads. Richard Donovan sat in the front row, immaculately dressed, his face hard as stone. Emily sat beside him, her small hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed downward. Grace stood at the defense table, her dark skin contrasting against the stark white walls, her eyes red but unwavering. Grace's lawyer, Mr. Jordan, an older black man with silver hair, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Stay strong," he whispered. "The truth has a way of surfacing." The prosecution painted Grace as a monster, someone who hid behind a gentle smile but lashed out when no one was looking. They waved Emily's notebook before the jury, read aloud her words, and played recordings of Richard's testimony. "She betrayed my trust," Richard declared, his voice cracking with anger. "I hired her to care for Emily, and she abused that trust in the worst way possible. What kind of father would I be if I didn't fight for justice for my little girl?" Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The jurors exchanged uneasy glances, and all the while, Grace sat silently, her hands folded, her eyes brimming with tears. When her turn came to testify, she spoke with quiet dignity. "I have cared for Emily since she was a toddler. I have never once raised my hand against her. She calls me her second mother. If I am guilty of anything, it is loving her too much." Her words carried weight, but against the tidal wave of Richard's wealth, power, and influence, they seemed fragile, breakable. The newspapers took sides. Television pundits debated endlessly. Was Grace a wolf in sheep's clothing, or was she an innocent woman crushed beneath the heel of privilege? Through it all, Emily remained silent, her small figure drowned in the storm of adult voices. At home, Emily's world grew lonelier by the day. Without Grace's bedtime stories and warm hugs, the mansion felt like a cage. Richard hired new nannies, but none lasted. Emily refused to eat, refused to smile. One evening, Richard found her sitting alone in the nursery, clutching her teddy bear. "Emily," he said gently, kneeling beside her. "You did the right thing. You told me the truth. You're safe now." Emily looked up at him, her blue eyes shimmering with unspoken words. But she said nothing. Instead, she pressed her face into the bear's fur and whispered something too faint to hear. Richard, exhausted and blinded by his own convictions, missed the signs. But Emily's silence began to worry others. At school, her teacher noticed her withdrawn behavior and her drawing pictures of a woman with kind eyes and dark skin holding hands with a little girl. "That's Grace," Emily admitted. When asked, "I miss her." The teacher, sensing something deeper, reported her concerns to the child advocate assigned to the case. By the time the trial reached its midpoint, whispers began to circulate that perhaps the truth was not as simple as the prosecution claimed. The courtroom was tense as Emily was called to the stand. She looked so small in the witness chair, her feet not reaching the floor, her teddy bear resting in her lap. The judge leaned forward. "Emily, do you understand why you're here?" Emily nodded timidly. "You're here to tell us the truth," the judge said kindly. "No matter what it is, the truth is what matters." The prosecution began gently, asking Emily if she had written the notebook entries. She nodded again. "Yes." "Did Grace hurt you, Emily?" Emily hesitated. Her small fingers twisted the teddy bear's ear. She yelled sometimes when I didn't listen," she whispered, "but she never hurt me." The courtroom erupted in gasps. Richard's face turned pale. The prosecutor pressed on. "But in your notebook, you said she did." Emily's eyes filled with tears. I wrote that because Daddy said I had to. He told me Grace was bad. He told me to write it." The words dropped like stones into a silent pond. The entire courtroom froze. Richard's lawyer tried to object, but the damage was done. "Why would your father say that?" the defense lawyer asked softly. Emily sniffled, "Because he didn't like that I loved Grace more. He said Grace was taking me away from him. But Grace never did. She just made me feel safe." Tears streamed down Grace's cheeks as Emily's trembling voice filled the room. The judge's gavel struck sharply to quiet the commotion, but nothing could silence the truth that had finally been spoken. The case unraveled swiftly after Emily's testimony. The jury acquitted Grace of all charges. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, their cameras flashing, their headlines shifting overnight. Child exposes father's lies and billionaire made scandal. Grace walked free, but her life would never be the same. The scars of humiliation, the months of fear, the betrayal of a man she had trusted with her livelihood all left deep wounds. Yet, when Emily ran into her arms outside the courthouse, sobbing into her chest, Grizz knew her pain had not been in vain. Richard, once untouchable, faced public disgrace. His company's board demanded his resignation. His investors fled, and his empire began to crumble. But worse than the financial loss was the look in his daughter S.I.'s eyes that no longer sparkled with love when she looked at him. "I'm sorry, Emily," he whispered one night, but the words felt hollow. His pride, his need for control, had cost him the one bond he could never replace. As for Grace, she chose not to return to the Donovan mansion. Instead, she opened a small daycare center in her neighborhood, using the donations that poured in from strangers who admired her courage. She called it Emily's Haven. Every weekend, Emily came to visit, her laughter once again echoing through the halls as she helped Grace read stories to other children. And though the world had been cruel, the truth had set them both free.